Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Muscle Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Pakulski, and you know that I have this incredible infatuation with understanding the brain, the nervous system, and now evolving into consciousness. I feel as though during my bodybuilding career, I had this amazing opportunity to learn and understand the body, learn and understand exercise. And perhaps the one thing that I wish I would have paid a lot more attention to is how my brain works and how my nervous system works and how this whole consciousness piece works. Because ultimately, the reason we do anything in life is to attain fulfillment, right? We want to feel great. We want to feel significant. We want to feel fulfilled. And all these things outside of ourselves, subjectively, don't usually do what we think they're going to do. And for me, it was climbing that proverbial mountain in professional bodybuilding to now realizing that that was an empty shell and it was unfulfilled. And now for me looking transparently for this evolved consciousness and this inner happiness and inner peace that we know exists inside of us. And one of the best ways that our scientific brains can start to quantify these things is literally looking at the brain waves. So what's happening in your brain? And there's scientists out there now who have actually quantified and graphed effectively brain states. And all of these brain states have a definitive characteristic, if you will. So we typically live in high beta, so we're thinking, we're very, very fast in our thought. Alpha is known to be kind of a meditative or creative state where maybe a child would live, and it's correlated with maybe things slowing down and you having this ability to respond in time rather than reacting. And then we go into theta, which is said to be a mystical state where that kind of transitional phase between sleep and wakefulness. And delta has been shown to be a deepest sleep state, but there's also some waking states of delta, which is very, very interesting. In my conversation today with Judith Pennington, who's an EEG expert. She's a brain expert. She studies everything to do with what happens when you're meditating, how to access these states, and how to quantify them. Because I think this whole meditation piece is very subjective for a lot of people. People are like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know if it works for me. I don't know if I'm doing it well. I can't. And obviously, you guys know I always say, if I can't, therefore I must. If you're somebody out there who's having a hard time with meditation, you're going to love this conversation. So Judith gives us some action items to know if we're meditating in the right way, some ways to actually start meditating. We talk about all the different brain states and how they work and how you can influence them. So the ideal scenario seems to be being able to shift through brain states. So if I'm constantly living in beta, I'm always in this state of anxiety, high stress, high functioning, high. It's a great place to be when you want to be there. You want to be able to access it, but then you want to be able to downshift, if you will, and get into alpha and be creative and be focused. And then you want to be able to downshift into theta, which is maybe a more mystical place, which is maybe a little more correlated with meditation and even potentially achieving these waking delta states, which Judith and I talk about a little bit. Super interesting. And that's my fascination is I don't just want to, live in alpha all the time. I don't expect to be a monk living on the top of a mountain. I expect to be able to, or I strive to be able to control my brain states. So thereby I'm in control of the way my brain works, and nothing outside of me can influence me to work in any other way. So extremely interesting conversation. Judith is really articulate and really, really well-versed in this stuff. You're going to love my conversation with Judith Pennington. Enjoy the show. I'm so excited to hear about what you're doing. And so I heard of you as an EEG expert, and that was very compelling to me because I'm very interested in that area. I've had minimal experience with EEG. I've done, are you familiar with Biocybernaut, Dr. Hart in Sedona?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So I spent 7 days out there with him, and that was kind of my first dive into understanding the implications of EEG. And I'd love to have you tell myself and the listeners what could be a long time, about EEG. And so, I think my listeners are relatively familiar, maybe not, I should make assumptions with beta, alpha, theta, delta as being the basic brainwaves, and obviously gamma now we know as well. But I'm really curious to have you kind of educate us on the topic and what we know is associated with each of those states.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to do that. Of course, the mind mirror is my biggest and greatest love, and that of
Yeah.
many people who have been working with it for over 40 years since it was invented in
Wow.
1976 by English biophysicist, Zen master, and hypnotist and clinical psychologist named C. Maxwell Cade. What Max did was he was using a physiology meter, and he discovered that as people deeply, deeply relax, then they have access to higher states of awareness, more expanded states, um, states that allow them to access an open flow of awareness from physiologically the stress, tension, to deep, profound relaxation that can go into even the coma state of hypnosis. But in 1976, when he encountered in one of his classes a engineer, then they engineered the mind mirror, and it was unlike any other. And in fact, there's nothing else like it today. It's completely unique because it looks at both sides of the brain in a single picture across an array of frequencies, which today range from 100 hertz, very high upper gamma, all the way down to zero point 0.5, which is low delta. And what Max found was that it's not about looking at any one particular category, gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta, uh, alone, but rather to look at how they interrelate. And that was really the key to understanding consciousness. And so the 40 years of background that we have, our database, is about looking at these interrelationships and understanding that when they interrelate in a specific way with low beta, high amplitude alpha, a certain proportion of theta, and a certain proportion of delta, then that is a peak performance pattern. Whether you're in sports or whether you're in performance art or whether you're an advanced meditator or a psychic or a healer or a medium or a spiritually conscious person or just the CEO of a corporation, or even a rap group in the studio, as was discovered by Max's protege, Anna Wise, who worked with a rap group there. And she found that it wasn't just spiritually conscious people, but that anybody could produce this particular orchestration of brainwave categories. And Max called them at first lucid awareness, and then when his book, The Awakened Mind, Biofeedback and the Development of Higher States of Awareness, when that came out, he called it The Awakened Mind. Anna Wise, in her book, The High Performance Mind, called it a high performance pattern. Today, with the Institute for the Awakened Mind, I call it creative flow and peak performance, because it is all those things. It's just today's language, you know. So what it means basically is that in the awakened mind pattern, you're reducing the beta waves of active external awareness. You and I are in beta right now talking to each other. Beta is verbal. We're processing language and we're attentive to one another. If one of us started to do some list making or decision making, the amplitude of beta would increase because then the brain is working faster, processing faster. If we were to move emotionally or mentally into a state of stress, anxiety, and panic, then the beta amplitude would be higher still. And this is amplitude, is the width of the pattern that you see on the mind mirror. And so a lot of awakened mind work is really teaching people how to collapse their beta as much as possible. In meditation, it's going to be a flat beta. In the work that we do, it's going to be a rounded, quiet beta with little amplitude up in the higher frequencies, a little bit more amplitude at a 19 hertz beta peak, and then quieter in the lower frequencies. The pattern actually looks very much like a humanoid picture. It's like beta is the head, and then alpha and the lower frequencies would be the arms, and then theta the hips, and delta kind of a little skirt at the bottom. And so once you decrease the beta amplitudes, then what you have is an increase in alpha. And this is really important because alpha is related to your daydreaming state of mind, a relaxed and a diffused and a detached level of awareness that is actually a bridge to your subconscious mind. So you can imagine that people in high beta whose thoughts are bouncing around, ricocheting around, end up with fragmented thinking, and they don't have access to their relaxed alpha. And via the alpha bridge, they don't have access to their subconscious mind. For awakened mind people, and for everyone really at this point, because all neurofeedback has taken a lot of Max's associations of these brainwave categories with states of consciousness. A lot of people will have alpha when they close their eyes, so they'll have that bridge. And this is why, as you can imagine, when people close their eyes to just think about how do I get that solution, how do I solve that problem, it just pops up. Well, that's because with the alpha bridge and the quieter beta, then you have access to what you could call your deeper core self or your essential being. I call it at times, depending on the audience, subconscious intelligence, because that's really what it is, down in your theta waves, which are about 8 hertz to 4 hertz. A lot of people don't have access to them at all because they're running around in high beta all the time. But when you do close your eyes or relax enough, maybe you're going to walk in nature to get that alpha bridge stimulated, because that's sensory, alpha sensory awareness. Then you do have access to theta. And theta, as the repository of your true self, you could say, is where you find your creativity and your insights and your ability to self-heal, because that is the home of your long-term memories. So you can see that a peak performance pattern would be someone who is mentally or verbally quiet, would have a sensory awareness, actually an expanded awareness of the field all around them, the space all around them, kind of super expanded in terms of their sensory awareness, and also have access to their deeper core self, and thus their creativity, insight, and ability to self-heal. And then the lowest and the slowest frequencies down in delta, which is that skirt I described, that is associated with a kind of radar. Now, everyone who is an athlete has got that radar. In fact, everyone's got the radar. This is very ancient. This is a kind of sensory awareness below the level of the thinking mind. And it is what allows us to sense whether there's a dinosaur around the corner, or whether, somebody is about to drop a barbell on our feet or whatever. And it's really our psychic awareness, but it's also our empathy. So you extend that empathy out to another person when you're talking with them, as I'm doing with you right here, and watching your body language. And if you were to start talking to me about, say, maybe your background as a child, with my empathy extended, to some extent, I could read between the lines. So that's that psychic awareness coming back, that intuitive awareness coming back. And then that level of delta is really important, because those low, super low and slow brain waves, when you have those activated, then there's no impedance between you and the collective unconscious. So therefore, the more you extend your delta, the more the greater the ability you have to self-heal, to become empathetic, to connect with people and your spirit. So for us, that awakened mind pattern is an open flow of awareness from beta all the way down to delta and the field and back up. And by that, I mean the quantum field of awareness, which is how I perceive the collective unconscious. Some people would call it universal mind, some would call it God, but whatever it is, there's an energy field out there, and you can connect with it through your delta, and in fact, even through your higher frequency gamma, and get information from it. So the awakened mind then is an open flow from at least beta to delta back up, in which you have access to the lucidity or the clarity of the quiet thinking mind, the sensory awareness of your relaxed alpha waves, and that essential beings, creativity, insight, and awareness in theta, and also your intuitive awareness and your connection to the field in delta. So that's for us what it means to be really awake. Just for people, and Max Cade, this is not some arbitrary pattern. He measured 4,000 people and found that this pattern was intact when people had this consciousness. And Anna Wise, his protege, measured people in at least 6,000 hour-long sessions, and she taught at Esalen Institute for 4 times a year for a 30-year period, taught this awakened mind pattern. And then since I formed the Institute for the Awakened Mind after Anne passed away in 2010, so that would be 7 years now, almost 8 years, we just have a wildly enhanced database that includes now gamma waves, those high-frequency waves that, oddly enough, above the stress, anxiety, and panic of high beta, end up being a peaceful and transcendent, loving and compassion, whole brain synchrony state that's forming new brain cells in the frontal lobes and in the hippocampus, the memory storage and retrieval. So you see gamma waves. We see gamma waves now with our much progressed mind mirror than either Max or Anna saw, although Max did predict that we would find still higher states of awareness than the awakened mind. So that's basically what we do, is we teach people to orchestrate their patterns to these known patterns of highly developed and spiritually conscious people, and it always works. I mean, the moment people hit that state, we'll ask them to look for a solution to the problem they said that they wanted to solve, and boom, up comes the information. And once you make conscious what was unconscious, then it no longer has any power over you, which means that you then become more conscious. So in a nutshell, that's what we do with those categories. And I've never seen it fail to work. And I myself have done, good grief, I'd have to say, maybe 5,000 hours of sessions and trainings with practitioners from all over the world. And they, in turn, are working with hundreds, if not thousands of people. And there are 60 of us. So it's absolutely credible and delightful science, because it gets people to where they want to go. They could feel what that feels like. And then once they feel, it's the same thing as visual imaging in sports. When you say practice, whack that tennis ball and win that tournament, or sink that golf ball, or lift that weight, or whatever it is that you want to do, you get 80% of the benefit just through mental imaging. And so in a way, awakened mind works the same way. Is that once you feel that state, you can remember what it felt like and then reproduce it and then begin to live in it with your eyes open. Now, that's a process. I don't see too many people with an eyes open awakened mind pattern, but it is what we're training people toward, and they do make gains, and they do experience this very same states of consciousness that Max Cade explicated in his book and showed and taught in his life.
Excellent, Judith. What are some of the processes you take people through to begin accessing this, awakened mind, the decreased beta and the alpha and theta states?
Well, the easiest and best way, oddly enough, but actually probably logically enough, is to reduce beta, and that means to slow the breath and allow the voluntary and involuntary nervous systems to come into synchronization. If you focus on your breathing, then just that one act of bringing the mind's attention to the body will synchronize those two systems.
How do we measure that? Is that something that you can measure with the mind mirror? The synchronicity
absolutely. Absolutely. And it also synchronizes the brain. Now, the more you drop your frequencies, once you move down into below alpha into theta, well, that automatically balances the brain, because then the brain doesn't have the stress of, oh, I'm thinking about this, there's too much light here, and those books are out of alignment, and did I actually turn my cell phone over and make sure it wasn't going to ring? Those would be the kinds of multiple streams of consciousness, the busy beta, right there that keep the tongue activated and talking verbally all the time. We're processing. And that's kind of a random beta, but it doesn't give you access to your alpha, your relaxed alpha, and your internally aware theta. So just focusing on the breath, slowing the breath, that activates the the parasympathetic nervous system, or relaxation nervous system. Slowing the breath, focusing on the breath, and relaxing the back of the tongue. Like, it's the most amazing thing. I have people come back after years and say, this is the best trick I've ever learned, and this was the key to meditation for me, because my mind was always so busy, so active. I was always having to catch my thoughts as they ran away and bring them back, and then by then my whole hour was up, or 20 minutes was up. But if people will just simply focus, close their eyes, and focus their awareness on the back of the tongue and relax the back of the tongue, then that big muscle relaxes the whole vagus nerve all the way down to the base of the spine, from the brain stem to the base of the spine. And you can't talk to yourself. And when you can't talk to yourself, well, then you're dropping into reduced beta, or even the flat beta of the meditation pattern. It's really quite simple.
It's not a matter of putting your tongue on the roof of your mouth, like some people indicate. It's literally just trying to relax.
Right. Wait, say that again?
It's not a matter of putting your tongue on the roof of your mouth, like some people advocate. It's just a matter of trying to relax your tongue.
You could do that. I mean, really, there's a case to be made that all forms of meditation are focused awareness. And in that focused awareness, basically what you're doing is taking your mental powers, and whether it's on the breath, this is mental training, the definition of mental training, and placing it on some object. That could be a candle, or the tongue at the top of the mouth, or anything. But and that is really the key to meditation, and to orchestrating the mind into a more beneficial state of awareness. Because I did this with a community college group of meditation students one time, and I would have them read a passage, just a 3 or 4 paragraph passage, and ask them to keep track of how many times their mind darted away. And they would come back astonished and say, wow. And I would have them then relax the tongue and slow the breath, and in their mind's eye imagine an egg. And they could do whatever they wanted with the egg. Some people decorated it, other people cracked it and fried it, and to see how many of their senses they were aware of having used during that exercise. And for some people, it was the 2 primary organs of perception, because there's usually only 2. For some people, it was a very multi-sensory experience. So they focus their awareness, they use their senses, they get the alpha, and then they go back and read a second 2 or 3 paragraph piece, and their mind didn't dart away. So yeah, you could put the tongue at the top of the mouth if you're focusing your awareness on the tongue, but then after a while, you're going to forget to pay attention to the tongue, to where you've got the tongue, and then off goes the mind with everyday, daily, busy affairs. So it probably takes more than that. It's going to take mental focus. And I think that's the difference between an ordinary person and a genius. My husband's a math genius, and you could blow up the chair next to his and he'd still be working on his problem, So, and in muscle building, it's the same thing, isn't it? You're totally focusing your awareness. I would expect to see some really nice alpha with people who do this work.
Very interesting. Tell me a little bit more about gamma. What do we know about gamma? And I'm very curious, and there's not much research on it seems, but I'm curious to hear about your experiences with it.
Yeah, well, gamma is our new frontier in this work, because gamma is a high frequency wave that's associated with learning, super learning, as a matter of fact. Because the brain is processing faster, it is more capable of taking in more information. But most importantly, when it's in those frequencies, which for some wonderful evolutionary reason no one understands, or not stress, but instead are related to peace and transcendence, then what it does is it synchronizes the four lobes of the brain, the temporals, the occipitals, the parietals, and the frontal lobes, so that all of a sudden you become more focused, really, and focused on one thing, and with the benefit of all your senses, because the temporals are hearing, the occipitals are seeing, the parietals are your sense of where you are in space, and then the frontals that's your executive function that manages all the other senses. So when all of your brain lobes are integrated with one another, then you have the most amazing level of awareness that is able to take in, and if you are a mind mirror student or understand our theory, to be able to integrate that gamma with alpha, theta, and delta. There are some people who have come here and I've hooked them up, and they report to me that they couldn't stand electricity. They would have to be hooked up outside, turn the overhead lights off, and all kinds of things like that. And sure enough, they had this on the mind mirror, this really untrained gamma that was out like this above the beta, which is, you see, where is the arch beneath my thumbs. And that beta, that gamma, was making them susceptible to electricity, basically, in the US coming out of the wall at 60 hertz. I mean, 60, an AC frequency of 60. And once they learn to integrate that gamma into their beta in a pattern like this shape above their alpha, well, then that sensitivity reduced and they were still able to operate at high performance. But basically, high performance integrated gamma means that they are having access to spontaneous creative insights, experiencing love and compassion, serving others. Some of these are awakened mind characteristics as well, but gamma, it's just happening at a faster frequency. And I call it superconscious because that person is superconscious and is attuned to more than this five sensory world. They're attuned to the existence of something greater, and they're in constant contact with it.
So does it seem like everyone has this state or not in your experience?
No, I see gamma in advanced meditators, sometimes as a result of their increase in theta and delta as they clear inner issues and get solutions and, get that open flow of consciousness. By increasing their theta and delta, there's some kind of little biofeedback thing that goes on, and then that triggers the gamma up in the high frequencies. Some people have it, the psychics, mediums, and healers have it because they're running these energies. They're tapping into the field, and then they're running the energies through their bodies and transmitting it, and that will show some gamma. I've seen gamma in people who were listening to binaural beats that were up in the gamma frequencies. But most people, and even most meditators, don't produce gamma at all. This is something that I think they could, once they realize what it is, and that tapping into the field is just simply a matter of expanding your awareness. As we sit here, I can increase my gamma by expanding my awareness and taking in the beautiful sunlight that's out my windows here, and connecting with my essential being in theta. I could feel some high pitches arising. I could feel myself relaxing and tapping into something greater than. And that's basically what gamma is coming out of, that awareness of something greater than.
You mentioned the coherence of the hemispheres of the lobes of the brain. Now, I don't want to assume that my listeners have any idea the relevance of that. So is that something that everyone has and they should assume they're all coherent, or is there some implication of having coherence in the hemispheres?
No, actually, and that's a terrific question. Most people do not have coherent brainwaves. What coherence actually means is that you have symmetry in the amplitudes of beta, alpha, theta, delta, gamma on both sides of the brain. So it's interhemispheric symmetry. The first thing that most people don't have is stability in their in the bandwidths. So you'll see on the mind mirror, you'll see alpha flare disappear, alpha flare disappear, alpha flare in different frequencies. You know, high frequencies in the left, low frequencies on the right. So most people don't even have stability unless they have a quiet mind. If they have a quiet mind, then they probably do. But then the kind of the higher criteria is that not only do they have stability, but are the amplitudes the same? If the amplitudes are same, then that means that those areas, wherever you're measuring coherence, for us here, it's going to be the back of the brain and the sides behind the ears. That means that symmetry and the amplitude over those locations is activating neuronal clusters that are working together to move electricity in a very consistent and organized and profused electrical activity. And this is great because you can see that you're moving toward coherence. When symmetry, we have amplitude symmetry, then you're moving toward coherence. And that coherence is where you see the brain lobes hooking up and moving into that focused state of awareness, which is where you move into more expanded states of consciousness.
Hey guys, I interrupt the podcast to bring a special message from Organifi. I absolutely love the idea of convenience and health, right? So for many years, I was the guy juicing. I was the guy jamming things into my juicer, into my blender, trying to get as many different micronutrients and phytonutrients as I could. And it takes time. It's ridiculously expensive. I mean, I used to try to put 5 to 7 fruits and vegetables, always usually vegetables, into a smoothie with some lemon and tons of ice and some water. And it ended up costing me $20 to $30 per smoothie. You go to Whole Foods, it's going to cost you $20 just to get a juice. It's extremely expensive. So I'm extremely grateful that Organifi has been so gracious to offer you and me a 20% discount off their greens drink, which is an incredible tasting, nutrient-dense array of superfoods. And it's honestly awesome. I use it daily. My kids even drink it. It's got a little minty flavor that just tastes awesome. They've also got the Reds, which I'm an advocate of using pre-workout. I'm also an advocate of using a little bit after you work out, just to get those high polyphenols in there. Again, not immediately after the workout because we want to have that oxidative stress, but maybe an hour afterwards with your meal. Great way to get some extra antioxidants and polyphenols into your brain, ladies and gents. And if you haven't tried the Organifi Gold, do it because you're going to thank me later. It's just an amazing tasting, calming formula that myself and sometimes my kids will enjoy before bed. And I hope you guys take this opportunity to jump on it and take care of Organifi because they're taking care of us. Truthfully great stuff that I use every day. My entire team here at the gym uses it, and we're loving it rather than having to take coffee in the morning, which I did for so many years, and sometimes I still do. It's really nice to have that refreshing, energizing green beverage in the morning. Add some ice, throw it in the blender. Tastes amazing. You could just shake it. Tastes great too. But I like to have it nice and cold. And while I'm sitting there doing my reading first thing in the morning, it's a great addition to my morning routine and gives me the energy I need for the day. And I know I'm covered, right? If I don't end up eating all my vegetables for the day, I have my micronutrients covered. That's enough talking for me. Enjoy the rest of the show. If I want to expand or accelerate, I guess, my ability to access alpha and theta, do you have some recommendations on frequency, how often I should be, or maybe some strategy to kind of accelerate my ability to access alpha and theta?
Yeah, the best one is to go out into nature and just notice the texture and the color of the leaves on the trees and the color of the bark, and look at that, and then expand your awareness to a sunset or a sunrise. So then that's the awareness of space. That immediately produces and increases alpha with your eyes open. To notice not just the sights, but the smells, the tastes, the sounds. So that will increase alpha, and that reduces beta. This is why we all go outside so much, as much as we can, right? Just to shift what it is that we're being aware of. So that will give you the alpha bridge, and that will give you access right there to your theta waves. In running, runners often talk about the runner's high. They trigger those endorphins. But it's also that there is a symmetrical movement here, a synchronized movement, and that's a brain balancer right there. So when you are balancing your brain with the symmetrical movements and at the same time noticing your rhythms, the rhythms of your legs moving in a symmetrical way, and your arms moving, well, then your sensory awareness is enhanced. And once you have the bridge, well, then you have access to your theta.
Wow, so simple. It seems like, we're so compelled to stay inside and exercise and such inside when it seems like, the one of the simplest cues is get outside and walk, and maybe accessing theta and be able to calm your anxious mind.
That's right. It's very simple. It is a bit ironic. There's one saving grace here, though, is that when you can't go outside, you can just run through some mental imagery on your own with your eyes closed. And as with the peak performance practicing with the eyes closed, you get tremendous benefit. In that case, you would just want to activate all of your senses. A good example would be what you could meditate on, closing the eyes, is just to say, what would I like my life to be? What would I like my life to look like, to feel like, to smell like, to taste like, to sound like? And just activate all those senses, which is activating those brain lobes, and focus on that. Let yourself meditate on that for 5 minutes. And if you've done that for 5 minutes, well, you're meditating. And if you can't do it for 5 seconds, well, then you need to slow the breath, relax the back of the tongue, and then go back to the visualization. Or we call it sensualization because it's using all the senses.
Very interesting. So one of the things that I think is it seems like as a bit of a dichotomy in the performance realm is a lot of us are using stimulants to increase our performance. We know, I believe, that stimulants increase beta. Yet you have seen that most people have an increased performance when they decrease their beta. Are you able to talk a little bit about that?
It's one of the greatest ironies. Everyone thinks that the faster you go, the farther you get, when in fact, the slower you go in terms of meditation and self-awareness, and in everyday life with that self-awareness of the awakened mind, then the more you're able to prioritize and see what's really real, what's really working. You have better connection with your body, better connection with your mind, better connection with your spirit, so that these are all synchronized and working for you. I'd love to get this information into corporations. Some realize it, and that's why you're seeing meditations move into meditation teaching and practice move into corporations, and even some high schools throughout the U.S. and all over in hospitals. You have mindfulness meditation, because what they realize is what you've just said. You speed up beta, well, you may be disconnecting from your body.
Very interesting. This is a practice that I'm very curious as to how we could start to compel athletes to remove themselves from the necessity of needing stimulants and start to believe that, hey, maybe we can access this higher state if we just remove it for a long time. What would be something that they would, look for as to understanding that they're in this awakened state or this high state of consciousness? Would it be like just a feeling of synchronicity? Would it be just a connection with with our senses? Like, would there be some cue for other than using the mind mirror to know that I'm in this state of synchronicity?
You ask such great questions.
Thank you.
The main thing would be to remember what it feels like when you had an insight and heard yourself saying, "Aha! Oh, I get it. I see it all. I see the understanding. I see the insight. I see the solution to the problem." And it's like you are amping up. You're amplified because now you're connected across categories and across frequencies. And that moment of insight is the awakened mind pattern. That is the peak performance pattern. And the peak performance pattern, when sustained, leads to flow, what's widely known as flow, the
Yeah.
state in which it seems like everything is unfolding before you and in you and around you and behind you in such a smooth and easy fashion. Just what you were looking for is right there. You understand what to look for. Yeah, that flow state. And that flow state is intuitive, you know.
Is that something that you personally access at will or often? The idea of being able to kind of slow down your mind and allow things to unfold around you at a rate that you can observe and take in more effectively?
Absolutely. I have to live in it because I am extremely busy. And if I didn't, have enough self-awareness to be able to manage and master my brainwaves, I would just absolutely fritz out and burn out like everyone else does when they are overwhelmed. I have a landmark, I mentioned that to you, is to know what it feels like to be in the awakened mind pattern and to reproduce that pattern so you can return to those brain waves of the original pattern. And so my landmark is the sense of light flowing right here in my head. And sometimes I just like.
Well, sorry, just to interrupt you quickly. When you say landmark, do you mean something that you visualize in your head or something that happens when you hit that state?
Happened when I hit that state, and I
Okay.
remember the feeling of it to return to that state.
And you bring it back. Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And everyone is we encourage everyone to get landmarks, and it can be a word, a symbol, a concept, or a body sensation. For example, if your listeners can remember an aha state, and most everyone can, then if they could close their eyes, bring that back to life, and then find what that feels like, then they have a landmark for the awakened mind and can reproduce it as often as they want and thus condition it and begin to live in it.
Very, very interesting. There's this term that comes to mind, and it's probably not a term that is relevant to you, but it's synchronicity. And we hear this term thrown around a lot is, these things just, it's like the universe happening for you kind of situation. Now, is this something that, tell me about that. So, I mean, you're an expert in this stuff and, some people believe, the world happens to you. Some people believe it happens for you. And I'd be very curious to hear, someone with your evolved mind and your understanding of EEG, what your thoughts are on that entire topic.
Well, I believe implicitly in synchronicity, and in fact, wrote a book called Your Psychic Soul, Embracing Your Sixth Sense.
Okay.
And toward the end of that book, I just dedicated the whole thing to brainwaves, just to basically prove what I was saying.
Yeah.
And when you hit the awakened, when you're incoherent, your brain is moving in such a disorganized way that a synchronicity could come and pop you straight in the face and you would just breeze right past it. And of course, everyone's had that experience where 5 minutes after something, you go, I knew that, I heard that, I felt that, I sensed that, but I didn't pay attention. Well, that's because high beta is not paying attention. So when you've got a quieter beta and you are paying attention to internal cues and you're in that awakened mind state, then what happens is that if some anomalous insight travels through the dialogue that you run in your thinking mind, you pay attention to it and you say, oh, what do you mean I'm going to be the one to hit that deer since I've just outrun that Mack truck? So that's a form of synchronicity, although an internal one. The form I think that you're probably talking about, I would call that the result of the flow state. When you're in an awakened mind, a peak performance mind, and you're in flow, and I'm not saying that flow happens for me 99% of the time. I mean, you really have to be undistracted from what you're doing and wonderfully synchronized and present to yourself and present to everything else. But that's when I see the synchronicities arise. And it's beautiful and awesome because then you are keenly aware that you are supported by the universe. And in fact, you are the universe, and that in fact, hey, you're making this universe, a co-creator in this universe, and whatever you put out into it is what's going to come right back at you.
Beautiful. Judith, would you be willing to share some of your day-to-day practices to maintain this level of consciousness and awareness? Because for my own personal selfish reasons, I'd love to know, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners would too.
Sure. Well, so my beta brainwaves got control of me for a long time recently.
Yep.
But lately I'm not traveling as much and I'm home more. And so that means that every morning, when it's not abominably hot like right now, I get into the hot tub and put on meditation, typically one of Anna Wise's meditations. And I go for some kind of self-discovery, insight, or solution to a problem. And the meditations last 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So I have a solution and I am zen in a beautiful meditation state by the time I get out of that and into the shower and then dress and go to my meditation room. Now, not everyone has this much time to spend, but 30 minutes can get you into an awakened mind state, or you can sit in a chair and listen to a guided meditation.
I know not everyone has the time, but I think what we would like to do is hear the ideal case scenario. Like if I had all the time in the world, what would I do?
Yeah.
And even though we can't do all of it, like I'd love to know what the ideal case scenario is, kind of like, working toward that. And that's, similar reason people listen to me is because at one point in my life, I was a professional bodybuilder and, they're not looking at the guy beside them who's got really small biceps. They're looking at the guy who's got the best biceps in the world, right? And that's kind of like you is I don't want to learn from somebody who's just started meditating. I want to learn from somebody who's mastered every aspect of the life or very close to it, right?
Wonderful. Okay, well then step 2 for me is to get into that meditation room. And I light a candle. I have some wonderful Nag Champa incense that I light. And I have a journal beside me. And I just sit in the chair and allow myself to relax back. Now, by now, see, I already know where it feels like to drop into theta. So closing my eyes gives me the alpha. I know that if I imagine myself going down and in, which is happening from beta to alpha to delta, theta to delta in terms of brainwave frequencies, but I imagine it happening in my body because this is really a hologram of consciousness, right?
Yep.
And down and in, lower and lower, deeper and deeper inside. By then, my beta's quiet. I've got my alpha. I'm in my theta. And I sit there. I always use some kind of inspiring passage, some kind of affirmation to keep my mind focused, because you can always have thoughts that will arouse from beta, like, oh, I forgot to do thus and such, or, oh, well, that's a great idea. It's yogis and other meditation teachers will say to allow those thoughts to just disappear. If you have a wonderful insight into a work issue or a relationship issue, just put that in a file folder and then throw it up into a file cabinet and after the meditation to address it then. That's usually what I do, but not always. Sometimes I can see that this is going to be a serious download, I'm going to pick up my pencil and pen and write it down and then go back to meditation because I know how to drop back down in. And I'll stay for maybe 45 minutes to an hour in meditation because that's when I'm going to really connect with my spirit and with the field. There's a beautiful thing that happens when you move into the expanded awareness past, beyond the awakened mind pattern. One of two things happens. Either you move into gamma waves that are part of the evolved mind pattern, which is a circle. So you imagine that humanoid shape of the awakened mind being a circle. And that's a unification with your highest self and the field itself, where you surrender the ego, the difference between subject and object disappears, and there's no I anymore. There's only, oh, this is it. Ah, this is. And you just stay in that state of consciousness for as long as you can. Sometimes it lasts only seconds. Sometimes you disappear and you don't even know where you've been. And some would call that samadhi. I just call it the evolved mind pattern. And when you come back from that, you always have this incredible download of energy and information, and everything in the body is resolved. If you had any pain, it's gone. If you had any emotional pain, like a lack of self-esteem or self-worth, then you bring back with you out of meditation the realization of who you really are. So that's one thing that can happen. That round pattern of the evolved mind involves low gamma. The other thing that can happen is you can move up into higher frequency gamma, say 45 hertz on up to 100. In that case, that is the superconscious pattern and above. And when you move into that awareness, it's a progression of the evolved mind. You know that not only are you part of everything inside this, for me, it's a luminous field, and sometimes it's energy. I can feel it flowing through my body of strong vibrations, and a purple eye that does this great thing. It's like it's not purple, it's actually indigo. It flares when I'm in a state of tremendous love. It flares in the third eye area of the forehead. Pop, pop. And it turns into geometric patterns, and then it turns into this crazy, wonderful download of information. You just move into other places, but it's not something you can bring back with you because you're not here anymore, so you're there. I don't experience that a lot, but I know that it's there, and I know that that's related to those higher frequencies of gamma, just because we've been doing some studies with people, and they report that as well. And at the end of the 45 minutes to an hour, I'm a different person. Sometimes, always actually, I will pick up my journal and write down what happened. And that's how I've managed to really master the meditation. And that would be good for your listeners to consider too. Because if you go into meditation one day and you can't focus and organize your mind and you write that down, and then the next day you go into meditation and you come out and say, gee, I wasn't aware of my body anymore for about, I don't know how long it was, maybe 10 minutes. You write that down. Then after a few days entry like that, then you go back and you say, well, what happened that made the difference on these 2 days versus these 3 days? And then you go, oh, I drank coffee those 2 days. And then there's one other really wonderful aid for people. If they will go to the institutefortheawakenedmind.com website, there's a link in the left column for it's called The Awakened Mind, and then there's a sublink that says Patterns of Consciousness, and there's a table called the Table of Subjective Landmarks, and it follows the descent down into meditation, so that 0 state is mind racing out of control. 6 is the evolved mind that I explained a minute ago. And so you could actually in your journal put what state was I in, find it, and then learn to lose your awareness of your body to be able to go into that pure mind and the pure spirit. And every time you go there, your brain has learned better and better how to do that. And so it gets faster. So the mental training is connecting your mind with your body, healing your body, extending your awareness of what's going on within and other people and your relationships with them, and helping you heal things in yourself so that your relationships with other people are better and your connection with your spirit is more constant and continuous. So yeah, I spend probably an hour and a half to 2 hours per morning in meditation. And they're the most productive meditations because sometimes I'll take that tablet out and write down the web page or the article I have to write, or prioritize this and prioritize that. I was a freelance writer for many years in Baton Rouge, which is my home. And where being a kind of type A, highly organized person, realized that meditation was for me, no matter what, was that I would have my notes from the night before or the day before, and then I'd go and start working on the article. And the lead paragraph of any feature story is always the most important. And so I could either not meditate and spend 1 to 4 hours getting
Yep.
that lead written, or I could go meditate and write that lead in less than 10 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes. So that's the kind of productivity that you're going to get from meditation.
I completely agree with that because I live that life all the time. I'm sitting there with writer's block, and I'm like, I can't write. And you meditate for 15 to 20 minutes, and all of a sudden, gosh, I'm like a machine. It's just organizing. I mean, the way I see it, just organizing your brainwaves, right?
It is. It is.
Such a beautiful thing. Judith, this is absolutely amazing. And I don't want to take any more of your time, but I think this has been incredibly eye-opening. And I'm so grateful for your knowledge and information. I want to send everyone to the Awakened Mind Institute. Can you tell us the website where they can find you?
Yes, institutefortheawakenedmind.com.
Do you do live events, or is it seminars, or what is your primary mode of influencing people?
Mostly I teach practitioners how to do this work and certify them to do this work. But I have had group brainwave trainings for people. Just a group says, hey, we want to come. And they come to my house and I hook them up here and we work for a day or a weekend. I don't do so much private sessions anymore unless people want a whole weekend or two or 3 days. But yeah, there are Awakened Mind people. There's a practitioner directory on the website. We're scattered around and not in the U.S., and not everyone is using the Mind Mirror 6, which is, you want to find someone who has a Mind Mirror 6 because that's where all the data analysis is. But even people who are using the Mind Mirror 3 without data analysis, they can certainly show people their brainwave patterns and help them get those internal landmarks for states of consciousness and thereby begin to be able to master their brainwaves and orchestrate them into higher states.
If I wanted to buy one of these machines for myself, is it relatively intuitive or is it really extremely complicated?
Getting it all connected up is, anybody can do that. That's quite simple. Certainly we have a self-training program, and the self-training program gives you a white outline that is wraps around the brainwave pattern that you are producing. And it's going to have, after the first session, a training summary that tells you what level you should be training on. So it's variable training levels. And you listen to audio cues and the brain adjusts itself. So no, it's not hard at all. Self-trainers, it's nothing to it really. The hookup for you would be extremely easy.
No hair, right.
Because you could use these adhesive electrodes and just clean the area, pop on an electrode, clean another one, pop the two in the back, and plug in the thing and select the self-training program, and you're off and running listening to the audio cues. And then you could train a variety of patterns, the meditation with the flat beta, the awakened mind problem solving. You could even train the evolved mind or the gamma synchrony patterns. But most people work with the awakened mind pattern and move on down the challenge levels. And what they say is that they become more intuitive with their psychotherapy clients. There was one guy who gave me a real kick. He's an insurance broker in Connecticut. And he wrote back and said that since he started self-training with the Mind Mirror, he is now able to anticipate the unanticipatable martial arts attack. Well, I don't know what it is, but apparently it's something no one ever sees coming. So yeah, self-trainers, it's easy for them. If you want to be a practitioner so that you understand all the nuances in the pattern and can train other people, well, then that requires 4 seminars of training and a lot of ability to do data analysis, measure physiology in comparison with the EEG. So that's more complicated. But no, for self-trainers, you can hook up a GSR, find out where your body tension is, what's aroused, how your sweat gland activity is. You need to be able to drop that activity to low stress, slow down the heart rate with the blood volume pulse sensor, which goes on one finger, and then pop those 4 electrodes on. And just looking at those 4 is completely intuitive. You look at where where you dropped your heart rate. Well, what was I doing then?
Right.
You look at your GSR. If the GSR is really high and you're showing a lot of tension, well, this needs to be a reduction of stress. So the physiology and the EEG together give you fantastic insights. And yeah, we've got as many more self-trainers than practitioners using the MindMirror 6 at this point.
Amazing. Now, one thing you mentioned that I forgot to ask was binaural beats. You brought that up, and everyone always asks, Ben, do you meditate with music? Ben, do you meditate with binaural beats? Do you meditate with apps? How do those things influence your brain states? Because I'm very curious if having something kind of obtrusive in your ear is in any way influencing your ability to access alpha, theta, delta.
Absolutely. So I've been working over the past year to do studies with the MindMirror at the Monroe Institute, which has a HemiSync. It's famous for HemiSync, and for showing brain scans that it does increase coherence in the brain, where the networks and the categories and the frequencies are all moving into synchronization. And yeah, it definitely works. I mean, this is where we've seen some gamma states, and that mostly we've been doing programs where we're monitoring people who are doing exercises with high gamma beats for remote viewing and out of body, where they have to either mentally remote view or rise out of their bodies and go over to the target, which is inside of a box on top of a rafter that no one can even see, much less find out what the target is. So they've got judges, they judge the accuracy of this, and it absolutely works. You see the gamma rise, the gamma beats in the SAM technology. It's called spatial angle modulation. It's raising the gamma frequencies in their brains, and they're flipping out of their bodies and circling that target like a drone and accurately reporting the content. So yeah, it works in that sense, but just the HemiSync and the iAwake and those different companies and those are the only ones I'm really familiar with myself. When they feed that beat in, the brain entrains in the same exact way that it entrains to our self-training program. And over a period of time, presumably, the brain will condition. That I'm not really sure about. I have seen at the Monroe Institute, I have seen some gains maintained from a program in June to a program in December. And people were training to meditation tracks on their own during that period of time. So I can say that I have seen that, but I don't know otherwise. What we would like to see people do is get a feeling for a peak state so that they can reproduce it with their eyes open at any time. That seems to us the smart way to go at it. But if you were to go into the kind of meditation that I just described, and you have a runaway brain, and you try relaxing your tongue and try slowing your breath, even counting your breaths, count of 4 in, a count of 4, 8, progressively relax your muscles and your brain is still running away, then by all means, get a alpha theta meditation track and get some help from the beats.
Judith, thank you once again so much for your time. I'm truly grateful, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
I appreciate so much speaking with you and your wonderful questions, and I thank the listeners who listen in, and by all means go to the website. There are a couple of free meditations, and there are a lot of free meditations by Max Cade on there, so we would love to wave at least hi to you from our community.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you again. Bye now.
Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Ben Pakulski and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.